For a second, the London room falls away. She is back in the Egyptian soil, feeling the packed earth give under her fingers, seeing shape turn into surface and then into a whole vessel. Now the vase stands in glass, admired by people who never felt the heat of the dig. The young officer looks from the vase to Eve with open astonishment. She explains the ibex handles. She points out the cartouche. She tells him the paint would once have been bright blue and that the original room would have looked full of color, not pale and tasteful the way a London case makes it seem. He does not glance away. Eve reads his attention as genuine. When he says Egypt looks different through her eyes, she believes him. Then he says, lightly but not carelessly, that they should go to Egypt together. Eve hears the future inside the line before she can stop herself. Highclere hears the cost. The next pressure comes at home. At Newbury, the gloss is still intact on the surface. Champagne, strawberries, pale summer suits, silk dresses, servants with silver trays, Carnarvon shouting for his horses. The young officer is careful around Eve's parents, and she finds that more touching than she expected. He asks whether her father will be furious if a horse loses. She laughs and tells him there are two safe subjects with Carnarvon, racehorses and Egypt. The advice slips out too easily. She hears herself helping a man speak to her father, and she feels the forwardness of it at once. Then her brother arrives with an American bride, and the whole mood changes. Eve can see from one look that this is serious. They are still holding hands when the introductions end. Later, when her brother gets her alone, the joking drops out of him. He says the family money is worse than she knows. He says that is all Carnarvon talked about with him when they last met privately. Money, or the lack of it. That shocks Eve harder than it should. The clues were there: sales, haggling, smaller staff, tight tempers, awkward economies in a house that once never admitted them. She had simply refused to read them. Then, her brother makes her promise to support the match with their parents. She promises at once. Underneath that promise, another realization settles in. If the money has truly narrowed this far, then archaeology is no longer a protected family indulgence. It is part of the strain. End quote. That knowledge stays with her through dinner. The room is too hot. The table is too crowded. The food is too rich for her to enjoy. Then Carnarvon does what he likes to do in company. He calls on Eve to tell the story of the chamber collapse and the escape from Egypt. She performs because she has been trained to perform. She even curls her fingers around the scarab in her palm as if it can steady her. She gives them the buried chamber, the trapped hours, the rush to Port Said, the danger, the relief. She does mention the foreman because she cannot bear to erase him completely. The guests still react the way her father wanted. Gasps, congratulations, admiration for Eve's nerve and her storytelling. No one follows the thread back to the Egyptian man who saved English lives. That leaves her hollow. When dinner breaks, the young officer is the one who stops her quietly in the passage and asks whether she is all right. He heard the same story as everyone else. He also heard what sat under it. Eve does not answer directly. Instead, she asks whether he wants to see the Egyptian objects up close before they go back into their cases. He hesitates only because he worries about offending Carnarvon. That small anxiety gives her a private thrill. His standing with her family matters to him because he matters. She leads him through the library, opens the hidden door in the bookshelf, and brings him into the music room. That room matters. It is where she and Carter turned a scarab into a trail. It is where Hatshepsut first became a live possibility. Bringing the young officer there is not a social gesture. It is a form of trust. Among the stacked crates from the exhibit, Eve opens a jewelry box and shows him a broad ancient necklace on red velvet. He asks if he may fasten it around her. She nods. His fingers brush the back of her neck. The touch does more than the stones. She asks how it looks. He tells her she is beautiful, and she hears that he means her. Then he kisses her. It is a new kiss, a startled one, and a real one. Eve is only just starting to relax into it when voices rise through the wall from the library. They spring apart. He unfastens the necklace quickly. They move toward the hidden door and then stop because the argument is right outside. Carnarvon is roaring that the American bride is unsuitable. Eve's brother roars back that he loves her. Then comes the line that makes the whole family crisis unmistakable. Love will not keep Highclere running. Eve hears it through wood and anger, and the money strain becomes fully real. Her father is not hinting at it anymore. He is shouting it. She closes the hidden door carefully. Then she turns back, mortified that the young officer has heard all of it. The family fight, the judgment, the money. He does not step away. He takes her hands and tells her she has nothing to apologize for. Eve reads that steadiness for what it is. He has heard the worst of the household truth, and he is still there. That steadiness keeps proving itself. With Eve's mother consumed by wedding plans, Eve falls into one of the rarest conditions in her life, near invisibility. She uses it the way she always uses freedom. She rides early, she reads, she disappears into the music room. Carter is still the archaeologist who can open doors for her, even while his methods keep testing her. Morning after morning, he and Eve cover the tables with maps, copied reports, notes on tomb robberies, old excavation records, and every scrap that might keep Hatshepsut alive as a practical question. The young officer keeps coming. One autumn visit is especially revealing. He finds Eve and Carter bent over the valley map and jokes that they look like detectives. Eve explains a possible area near an older find. Carter adds details about debris, bandaging, and an earlier chamber once thought to belong to Tutankhamun. The young officer listens closely enough to ask the question that matters most to Eve. Does any of this tie back to Hatshepsut? Carter answers too sharply. He says Hatshepsut's tomb has no bearing on where they choose to dig. The young officer steps back at once. Eve feels the blow of the rudeness, then the reason under it. Carter is frightened of loose talk because the whole excavation is hanging by a thread. She follows the young officer into the corridor and apologizes for Carter's tone. He stops her at once. He tells her not to apologize for her father, or Carter, or the work itself. Then he says something Eve has likely been waiting to hear all her life. While he is doing his own duties in England, he says, he will be glad to picture her excavating in Egypt. One day he may even dig beside her. Eve does not know yet whether that future can exist. She does know he is imagining it with her. By autumn, the music room plans had to face another failing season in Luxor. One last year. In Luxor, the next season goes barren. At the Winter Palace bar, the hotel is still elegant in the old way, yet the mood at Eve's table is sour from the start. Carnarvon looks at the season's work and sees emptiness. Hundreds of tons of earth moved, and almost nothing to show for it. No major object, no decisive trace, no discovery large enough to answer the expense. Carter says he has some valuable items he could sell to help cover the costs until the dig turns something worthwhile up. He says it carefully. Eve hears what sits behind the offer. His private traffic in antiquities is moving closer to the center of the story. Carnarvon bristles before he softens. Pride reacts first. Need comes second. Eve says nothing. She is watching both men and hearing more than either of them wants to spell out. That failure is what turns Eve's request into a final plea. Back at Highclere, Carnarvon finally says aloud what she already feared. He cannot afford another fruitless year. He has sold inherited properties. He has sold art, furniture, books. Taxes keep rising. Income keeps falling. Egypt can no longer sit outside the family arithmetic. Eve asks for one last year in the valley, just one. She does not argue as a child pleading for a whim. She asks as someone who knows the window is closing and will not open again. And Carnarvon hesitates, and Eve can hear what it costs him even before he answers. He grants the year for her sake, only for her. Then Carter makes his own offer. If money is the obstacle, he says, he can fund the next season himself. He has made enough over the years selling objects to museums, collectors, and dealers to cover it. Carnarvon will not take the money, but the offer still changes the room. Eve now hears, with complete clarity, how close Carter's gray market life stands to the formal excavation. Wait, Carter's offer buys time, and it pulls his gray market methods closer to the center. Cairo, Madame Zaghloul, and KV-20. Before that final push can begin in earnest, Eve and Carter make one more desperate move through Cairo. They leave Sheffields quietly, while Carnarvon is occupied elsewhere, and head into the dealer world. Carter carries a satchel with objects of his own. That detail matters. He is not entering this market as a curious outsider. He is known here. The dealers greet him by name. They ask what he has brought. Eve watches him slide into that older, murker rhythm with unsettling ease. They stop at stall after stall. Reproductions, fragments, late pieces, broken statue parts, objects with stories nobody can prove. Then they reach a back room in a more serious shop, and the search tightens. Eve holds a lamp. Carter studies surfaces, glazes, traces of inscription, style. He asks short, careful questions. The answers never quite hold. Nothing can be tied securely to Hatshepsut. Nothing gives them a tomb. The day widens in a different direction when an American writer quietly takes Eve to Safia Zaghloul, received by visitors as Madame Zaghloul. Her house does not feel like a drawing room. It feels like a working center of nationalist life. Guards stand outside, women move in and out, messages are carried. Nothing about the place is decorative. Madame Zaghloul speaks to Eve with calm authority. She talks about boycotts, pamphlets, protests, and women stepping into public action because the country needs them to. When Eve, pulled by old instinct, brings up Hatshepsut, Madame Zaghloul does not romanticize the connection. She makes it immediate. Ancient Egyptian women are part of Egyptian history, and that history still belongs inside Egyptian life now. Eve hears the challenge in that. She came to Egypt for the past. Madame Zaghloul force asks her to see the claim of the present. Those words stay with Eve when she turns back to Hatshepsut's missing burial. She has a theory now, shaped partly by the modern political conversation she has just had. Hatshepsut so often grounded her power in fathering gods that Eve begins to wonder whether the old tomb of KV-20 still hides something unfinished. She, Carter, and the foreman go down into the reopened chambers and search carefully for any hidden seam or blocked space. The work is slow, hot, and disappointing. They trace walls. They check joints. They work through hope until hope fins. What they find in the end is only a broken ushabti that may connect to Hatshepsut. It is a real clue. It is very small. It cannot buy another season by itself, and it cannot prove where the pharaoh finally lay. Cairo gives Eve politics and one small KV-20 clue. It does not give her the tomb. Hatshepsut takes the crown. Hatshepsut is no longer preparing for power. She stands in it. In the dressing chamber before the coronation, the regalia feels heavier than it did in theory. The wig, the beard, the linen cut to kingly lines, the crown that will soon turn image into law. Senenmut stands close by her now as advisor, builder, and hidden partner. After that first clear naming, he settles into the role that matters most here. The advisor, he steadies her with the quiet confidence of a man who has helped design the path to this day and knows the cost of it. Outside, the temple terrace is already crowded. Priests, officials, guards, elite families, and the public beyond them all wait to hear what the state is finally willing to say aloud. 2 thrones stand ready. The co-ruler is already seated on one of them, still young enough that his smallness is visible even inside royal dress. The ritual moves forward through chanting, priestly proclamation, and the handling of sacred objects. Hatshepsut receives the crowns. She takes a throne name tied to Ma'at, Re, and Amun, then hears the room name her openly as Pharaoh Hatshepsut. That is the real change. The kingdom has seen hints, costumes, reliefs, and gradual preparation. Now it hears the claim in full. Hatshepsut feels two truths at once: relief, because the long approach is over; risk, because there is no going back now to the useful half-light of regency. When she turns to the people, she has to carry both. After the ceremony, the co-ruler looks up at her and asks, in the plain way of someone still young, whether she will leave him to face all this alone. Hatshepsut takes his hand and tells him they will do it together. She means it in that moment. She also knows how hard that promise will become. Punt returns, marriage, and the harder image. Rule tests itself in public, and Hatshepsut learns that again in the audience hall. A noble interrupts her with a complaint about the expense of the expedition to Punt. He speaks too boldly, and Hatshepsut hears the room hear it. She cuts him down in front of everyone. The point is not only punishment, it is control. If public challenge is allowed to stand, it grows, then the doors burst open. The expedition leader from Punt has come back. He is changed by the journey, darker, harder, carrying proof in his wake. Men follow him in with incense, living incense trees, hides, ebony, gold, and foreign envoys. The smell of the resin shifts the whole chamber. Hatshepsut sees what the moment gives her: success that can be counted, touched, planted, and shown. Punt is no longer a claim, it is a return. Years later, a different public test arrives from inside the dynasty. During a festival procession, the co-ruler finally says what has been growing in him. He believes the people do not see his power. Hatshepsut reads the danger quickly. If that grievance hardens, shared rule becomes a wound. She answers by giving him visible military authority. The move is generous, strategic, and necessary. It keeps him tied to the system rather than set against it. The family line tightens further when Neferrer marries the co-ruler. The ceremony is magnificent, and Hatshepsut gives the couple a palace of their own. She watches from the height required of a pharaoh and feels the distance as a mother. Déroulé. Her daughter is safer in the structure. She is also farther away. The whispers do not stop. Shared rule makes image harder, not easier. To protect the throne, the co-ruler standing, and Neferrer's future, Hatshepsut keeps sharpening her public form. By the final day of the said festival, her attendants bind her chest under the kingly dress. She steps before the crowd in a fully male-coded image and ties the whole Thutmose line to herself in one long public story. It works. That is part of the price. Carter's telegram and the sealed door. Weeks of waiting in England end with Carter's telegram. The message is brief and electric. A magnificent tomb, seals intact, come at once. The journey south feels endless because desire makes time worse. By the time Eve and Carnarvon reach Luxor, Carter is waiting at the station, drawn tight by secrecy and strain. He warns them at once to keep their voices down. Local gossip is already moving. The valley will not stay quiet for long. The site, the workmen have cleared the staircase. Eve sees broken fragments in the spoil and realizes the discovery has already begun giving up evidence even before the real door is touched. The foreman is there, steady as ever, helping keep the whole place controlled. They go down the steps. The first doorway still carries the necropolis seal. Beyond it lies a rubble-filled corridor. More clearance follows, more heat, more waiting. Then the second blocked doorway appears at the far end. Eve kneels with Carter at the plaster. Dust comes away under the brush. The signs emerge. Her pulse beats harder as the cartouche clears. It is Tutankhamun. The discovery is immense. Eve feels that at once. She also feels the private drop of disappointment, because the name on the door is not Hatshepsut's. Carter sees that in her face and lays a hand on her shoulder. Eve forces herself to stay with the scale of the moment. Whatever else she wanted, this is real wonder. They do not open the door then. They cannot do it in any way that would later look clean. Still, once they leave the stair and come back into the falling light, the sealed door keeps pulling at all three of them. Now, the night they went in first. No one rests that evening. At Carter's house, the tea goes cold while the same fear circles the room from three directions. Carnarvon fears thieves, officials, delay, and the loss of control. Carter fears mishandling, rumor, and damage. Eve fears the same things and also knows the step they are contemplating is wrong. That does not stop the pull of the sealed chamber. End quote. Carnarvon is the first to say they may never get another chance to see the tomb untouched. Carter resists for a little while, then he gives in on strict conditions. They go only to look. They do not disturb the contents. They do not remove anything. They make the smallest opening possible and come out again. Eve hears the law they are breaking even while she agrees. They go back at night with only a few trusted men, the foreman among them. The hole Carter cuts is small. The breath of old air that comes through it is smaller still. Then he raises the candle, looks in, and speaks the line that will outlive the night. He sees wonderful things. Eve looks next. Gold answers the candlelight from inside. Shapes resolve slowly. Chariots, ceremonial beds, boxes, black statues, a throne. Nothing is laid out for display. Everything is crowded into the room as it was left. They enlarge the opening and crawl through. Inside, the antechamber feels dense with heat and buried time. Eve sees the objects one by one, not as a single blaze. A lion-footed couch, staffs, shrines, floral garlands gone dry and dark with age. She is awed by it, and she is uneasy too. Wonder and trespass have arrived together. Then she notices something else. There is no sarcophagus in the room. That leads them deeper. A side opening reveals another packed chamber. Then the two black guardian statues at the far wall begin to read differently. Eve understands what they may be guarding. She finds the blocked inner doorway behind them, and the whole discovery opens wider still. They now know there are deeper chambers beyond the one the world is already poised to celebrate. When they climb back out into the night, nothing has been taken. The rule has still been broken. The Neferer is taken. Years earlier, on the West Bank, Hatshepsut stands above her mortuary temple with the advisor beside her and allows herself a rare private happiness. The terraces rise cleanly from the cliff. Hidden nearby, if the plan holds, are the secret tombs he has prepared for them, close enough to face one another in death. For a moment, she is only a woman looking at the future she wants. That moment ends with a courier. The summons from the palace is urgent, which already feels wrong in a life built on ritual timing. Hatshepsut and the advisor hurry back across the river. In a private chamber off the throne room, they find the co-ruler pacing. His face is wet. His control is gone. Neferer has been taken. The captors are kin-aligned with his grandmother's side of the family. They are holding Hatshepsut's daughter and demanding one thing in return: Hatshepsut's death. Hatshepsut forces the questions out quickly. Is Neferer alive? Is the grandson safe? The answers so far are yes. That is mercy. It is not enough. As the three of them speak, Hatshepsut judges that the threat is larger than one kidnapping. Her bloodline is part of the issue. Her public existence is the deeper issue. A woman ruling in full pharaonic form has become the offense some of these relatives want to erase. If she stays visible, the danger to Neferer and the boy may keep renewing itself. She sees the shape of a brutal answer before she speaks it aloud. Tutankhamun becomes a spectacle. After the secret entry, events start moving too fast for anyone to hold them cleanly. There is the formal opening with officials. There are guards at the site. There are police for the crowds. There are reporters at the Winter Palace and in the valley. There is the paid exclusive with the Times. There are more supplies, more technical worries, more packing, more photographs, more pressure. Luxor begins turning into a fever around one dead king. Inside the tomb, the work itself is still grounding. Eve helps with mapping, cataloging, and the slow movement of objects out of the antechamber. That rhythm is what she came for. Outside, the city is already changing shape. Tourists crowd the hotel lobbies. Telegraph lines multiply. People who barely knew Tutankhamun's name a month ago now want the thrill of having seen his threshold. In the middle of that frenzy, the young officer arrives unexpectedly with his parents. He had meant to come later and alone. The visit is immediately different from the future he and Eve had imagined. He is there to see her and the work. His parents are there to see the famous tomb. The contrast shows at once. His mother is startled that Eve actually works at the site and entered the chambers herself. His father jokes about Carnarvon's great gamble paying off. Eve hears in them the wider European hunger that has descended on Luxor. She does not think they are uniquely cruel. She does think they are part of a spectacle that makes Egypt feel hunted by admiration. The public opening of the burial chamber makes that feeling worse. Chairs are set out before the last barrier as if the tomb were a theater. Guests sit, reporters rage outside. Carter chips through the blocking while the room grows hotter and more impatient. When the first opening appears, the young officer's mother gasps that she can see gold, and the whole gathering surges forward. Once the opening is large enough, Eve goes in with Carter and Carnarvon. The burial chamber is magnificent. Painted walls, the quartzite sarcophagus, the canopic shrine, the enclosing goddesses. Yet the objects that strike Eve hardest are the 7 wooden oars set aside for Tutankhamun's journey in the next world. Standing in that chamber, she feels less like a conqueror than an intruder. The strain that has been building between Carter and Carnarvon finally breaks when the guests are gone. Carter is furious about private tours, delays, and the damage spectacle can do to the work. Carnarvon is furious about being challenged in front of his own discovery and about the whole operation slipping out of his control. They shout over the times, over tourists, over press access, over the nationalists, over who is protecting the tomb and who is endangering it. Then they put hands on each other. Eve steps between them and stops it. She orders the tomb temporarily closed on whatever technical grounds they need to cite. She orders Carter back to the work itself. She orders Carnarvon away from Luxor for a few days on a dahabeah, because both men are too tired and too angry to think clearly. In that moment, she hears her own authority come out in a voice she has been trained for all her life and almost never allowed to use. A proposal, a river break, and the end of partage. At the station the next day, the young officer finally says plainly what he has been showing for months. He tells Eve he does not need to dig a pharaoh out of the sand to know what he wants. If her life includes Egypt, then he wants Egypt. If her winters are spent excavating, he will stand beside that life, not in its way. Then, under the station awning, with his parents watching from the train window and the whole thing far less polished than he had planned, he asks her to marry him. She says yes. The young officer is now her fiancé, still offering a future that includes Egypt even as Egypt itself is closing to her. The dahabeah gives Carnarvon real rest for the first time in weeks. Carter sends notes. The tone grows calmer. Then a mosquito bite on Carnarvon's cheek turns ugly, and Eve keeps him out on the river longer than planned. When they finally return to Luxor, the city feels transformed again. More tourists, more noise, more commercial frenzy around Tutankhamun. In the private dining room at the hotel, Carter waits with updates on the tomb, the packing, the photographs, the steel gate, and the constant labor of preservation. For a little while, the three of them can still talk about the work itself. Then Carter turns to politics. He says he has heard that Zaghloul is likely to come to power and that the new government will treat Tutankhamun as a national symbol. That means a direct challenge to the old excavation system. Partage was the old arrangement under which the excavator expected a share of the finds. That is why the ownership fight turns personal so fast. If partage goes, the tomb stays in Egypt in full. Carter says officials are likely to supervise the site closely and keep every object in the country. Carnarvon hears that as a financial wall. Without a share of the fines, he says, he cannot keep paying for the excavation, the storage, and the preservation. Once partage hardens against them, the moral question stops being abstract. Hatshepsut chooses erasure. The pharaoh now speaks simply as Hatshepsut, because the choice is no longer ceremonial, but personal and dynastic. In the private chamber, with Neferur still in enemy hands, Hatshepsut says the only path she can see, clause Apsius. The world must believe she is dead. If her enemies think the female precedent has ended with her, they may return Neferur and stop hunting the grandson through her. The advisor breaks first. He wants another answer. He wants resistance, concealment, retaliation, anything except this. Hatshepsut holds steady because she believes the threat will keep renewing itself while she remains alive and visible. She would rather lose the public self than gamble with her daughter and grandson. The co-ruler recoils as well. He does not want to be seen as the man who killed her. Hatshepsut answers that appearance is exactly what matters now. If the captors believe he has done it, they will read him as safe for their world and dangerous only to hers. Then she gives the harder order. Mourning will be staged, a body will be prepared, public rites will be observed. After that, her monuments must be cut back, her names removed, her images broken out of walls and obelisks. A false death alone will not do enough. The visible memory has to go with it. She does not frame this as revenge waiting to happen. She frames it as survival. The co-ruler now stands as the king who must carry out what she ordered. The pouches and the Nile. Back in Luxor, after Carter lays out the political terms, he turns to the sideboard and shows them the diplomatic pouches. The archaeologist who taught Eve the field is now asking her to accept a removal she cannot accept. He explains the plan with alarming calm. Diplomatic mail cannot be searched. A few carefully chosen objects can leave Egypt quietly, enough to fund what remains, enough to keep the excavation alive. Carnarvon understands at once and, for one terrible second, looks relieved. Eve understands just as quickly and hears the word that neither man says first: theft. She tells them the objects are not theirs. Carnarvon answers with the language of cost, effort, contract, and years spent searching. Carter answers with the language of necessity and the future of archaeology. Eve hears both men clearly. She also hears how possession sits under both arguments. They want the work to continue. They also want the right to carry Egypt's dead away when Egypt has now said no. She says the right to excavate was granted by Egypt, and Egypt has reclaimed it. Carnarvon says years of English money and labor should count for something. Carter says the work ends if they do nothing. End quote. Eve answers that the line is already in front of them. Then she moves toward the pouches. Carter gets there first and blocks her. Carnarvon comes in from the side, where one sharp second all three stand locked in place around the sideboard, with the pouches between them like a verdict. Then Carnarvon sways. The fever has already been working through him. Now it takes him down in full. Eve catches him as best she can. His skin is burning. Carter drops beside them. The argument vanishes under emergency. A doctor is called. Servants run. The hotel keeps making noise outside the room while the crisis inside it becomes private and brutal. For the rest of the ending, the patron recedes and her father comes forward. The newspapers call it a curse. Eve knows it is infection, delay, exhaustion, and bad luck. She does not waste energy arguing with headlines anymore. She stays beside his bed. She cools his skin. She listens to his breathing. Carter hovers at the edges with medicines, practical help, and the full weight of what now lies between him and Eve. She does not clean him into a villain. She also cannot go with him any farther. When the boat is ready to take her father north for treatment, Carter comes to the dock to say goodbye. He apologizes quietly. Eve knows he means it in the only way he can. She also knows the apology cannot carry her back across the line. Then she asks for one moment alone on the bank. Across the Nile, the west bank slowly comes clear in the dawn. The green edge, the rise into desert, the pale outline of Hatshepsut's temple, the fold of the valley. Eve stands facing it and feels the full shape of the ending. The modern line never uncovers Hatshepsut's tomb. Tutankhamun remains a genuine marvel. He also became the point where Eve could no longer pretend that desire, scholarship, ownership, and empire were separate things. She takes the scarab from her pocket. It has been with her from the beginning, a small object and the one that started everything. She walks down to the waterline, crouches, and presses it into the wet Nile mud. Then she covers it with sand. That is the gesture the episode closes on. No triumph, no solved mystery, no possession carried home. When she rises and turns back to the boat, the West Bank keeps its distance. The hills do not answer her. Somewhere in that landscape, Hatshepsut's resting place may still lie hidden. Eve leaves without it. She leaves with grief, with love, with her father's illness beside her, with her fiancé still waiting ahead, and with a changed sense of what archaeology has been asking from her all along. Across the river, the tomb site remains unresolved. The ancient answer came through Hatshepsut's last choice. Eve's ending comes through refusal and relinquishment, and as the boat pulls away from the bank, she holds to one last hope, that one day no woman, in history or in life, will be erased. Once the plot ends, the book's real subject is how credit gets assigned inside a famous discovery story. That is the frame that lingers with Daughter of Egypt. The novel brings Lady Eveling back into view, then tracks the narrowing that made the accepted version feel complete. That places the book squarely inside Marie Benedict's larger project. Across novels on Maleva Marie, Clementine Churchill, and Hedy Lamarr, Benedict keeps returning to women whose historical weight was reduced, simplified, or misfiled. This one feels especially clear inside that body of work. It is one of her strongest books about credit, erasure, and institutional memory. Part of that comes from Benedict's method. She works from the gaps in letters, memoirs, biographies, and public records. She treats omission as part of the evidence. Then she builds a researched reconstruction inside those missing spaces. That approach fits this novel especially well because the whole argument turns on what the record leaves out and who gets to sound official when that record is repeated. But what makes Daughter of Egypt stand out, though, is the way it doubles its argument. Hatshepsut was chiseled out of the ancient record by later rulers. Lady Eveling was reduced inside a modern discovery story whose durable public names were male. Set together, those two lines do more than create a clever parallel. They show forgetting as a process. A name is removed, a witness is downgraded, a cleaner version of events gets passed forward until the absence starts to look natural. The Hatshepsut thread matters for another reason, too. It gives the novel a longer historical scale. Erasure here does not feel like a minor failure of publicity or a simple case of one person being overlooked. It starts to look like a recurring way power protects itself. Titles, monuments, records, and later retellings all help decide who appears central and who becomes decorative. Once that echo is in place, Lady Eveline's minimization reads as part of a familiar pattern. The tools are different. The logic is very close. That shift is what gives the book extra weight inside Benedict's catalog. In some of her novels, the main achievement is restoration. A woman is returned to her proper size in history. Here, the restoration is only the first move. The book keeps pressing on the mechanism behind reputation. It asks the reader to notice who writes the report, who gets quoted, whose memory becomes public memory, and whose role survives only in the margins. That is why this novel feels especially sharp. It studies production of the official record, not just the damage that record leaves behind. It also shows the gap between presence and acknowledgement with unusual clarity. A person can stand close to the event, help shape its meaning, and still fail to enter the durable version of the story. That gap is where Benedict does some of her best work. She keeps attention on the people who witness history, carry it, and help interpret it, then vanish once the credits get written. In this book, credit is never a simple matter of who was there. Credit follows power, class, publicity, and accept. Add authority. The second external point worth keeping is the world around Tutankhamun itself. The 1920s setting matters beyond atmosphere. Archaeology sits inside British imperial power, private wealth, press spectacle, legal control over antiquities, and rising Egyptian nationalism. In that climate, discovery carries political weight from the first day. To uncover the past is also to name it, control access to it, display it, and claim authority over its meaning. The tomb becomes part of a contest over owner, ship, and interpretation, and everyone around it is pulled into that contest. That wider context sharpens the book's central question, because the struggle over objects and the struggle over names follow the same lines of power. That context also keeps the novel current. Contemporary debates about restitution and cultural ownership have changed how readers hear imperial-era discovery stories. The question now includes more than who found something first. It also includes who had the power to claim the find, classify it, exhibit it, and turn that claim into accepted history. Daughter of Egypt keeps that issue at the right scale. It does not drift into policy argument. It stays focused on the human level, where authority becomes visible through naming, credit, and exclusion. So, the cleanest closing judgment is this. Daughter of Egypt matters because it shows how forgetting gets made, it restores Lady Evelyn, and it exposes the rules that made her easy to minimize in the first place. By the end, the tomb also functions as a test of authority. The lasting question is who gets to speak for the past, who gets credit for bringing it into view, and who gets remembered alongside it.